Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
And hello, and whatever proper salutation is whenever you're listening to this on the Temple Beth Am podcast. We are back and better than before. I don't know. That remains to be seen. Okay, let's jump into it. According to my notes, we ended on a verse that we did not read the Rashi on, and that is chapter 8. How's the sound? Joanna, Rick, you can hear me at the microphone at this distance?
Yes, but the visual, if the camera could be raised up higher, it'd be nice. But it's okay. It's okay.
What? You don't like my chin? What's wrong here?
No, well, you're far away, but it's okay. It's okay.
And if you, Rick, wouldn't mind like trimming a little bit when you do the beard, just it's a little bit lopsided from this angle. If you just,
hey, I didn't get personal with you. I'm just saying the camera height is lower than it usually is.
Chapter 8 of Shemot, verse. We read verse 10. That's what I have in my notes. We never read the Rashi, but we need to kind of get back into it. So we are at the end of the Tzfardaim, the end of the frogs. Okay. What's that? Shemot chapter 8, verse 10. But we'll go back to 9 a little bit, right? So remember, there had been this way of understanding that Moshe was challenging Pharaoh. I'll give you a moment to pretend that you're the one in power. You tell me exactly when you want the frogs to leave, and I'll do it. And it'll be clear that you actually do not have the power because I'm the one who is going to make that thing happen. So if you look at verse 9, Vayas Adonai kedvar Moshe, God did what Moshe had said, meaning to remove the frogs at the moment that Pharaoh had asked. Vayamutu hatzfardaim, the frogs died. Min habatim, from the houses, umina chatzerot, from the courtyards, umina sadot, so they died. And then we have a wonderful image. They didn't die and disappear. It's not poof. Vayitzberu otam chomarim. The Hebrew root sabar can mean several things. Here it means to gather, collect, pile up. They collected them, chomarim, and that's the two-word Hebrew phrase that is not easy to translate because it's not a common Hebrew word. And that's the thing that Rashi is going to comment on. What we know is that somehow the doubling of the plural word suggests an intensification of something, a lot of something. So whatever a chomar is in biblical Hebrew, it's a lot of them. Vativ ash haaretz, and the land stunk, right? Which connects the Tzfardaim plague to the blood plague because that's what happened to the Nile. Okay, that's the verse that we ended on. I don't remember if there were like any leftover questions that we want to talk about before we jump into the Rashi, but now that we're reading it again, does it bring up anything for anybody before we jump into the Rashi?
Just use the subject of
Okay. Remember, I know it's annoying. If you're going to talk around the table, grab a mic. What Joel said is, what is the subject? What is the grammatical subject of Vayitzberu? It's a they, right? And what are the possibilities of who the they could be?
frogs.
The frogs self-piled, okay?
Pharaoh's people, or
Okay, a generic they, the ones who were most impacted by the frogs, right? The ones who had been plagued by them, they're dead, but their plague is not over. They still have to pile up stinky heaps of frogs.
Pharaoh's servants.
Yeah, or the servants or the courtiers, the very ones who had been, have been unable to match God's powers. Now they're in cleanup mode. Okay? Use the mic, Rachel.
Maybe it'll be in the commentary, but did the Hebrew slaves need to do this? This is the kind of work that if you had a slave, you want the slave to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Right, the Pharaoh's being harangued, but he's still in power with slaves, and maybe he would have assigned that. And there's really there's no clue in the verse. There's no obvious clue in the verse. There's no antecedent you go back to. The last they plural verb is the tzvardaim, who are the ones who are dying. So it's not like that subject is carried over. So it's just a generic, they did it, right? Okay. Anything else on the words, Rebecca?
We'll be high tech here. Maybe it's even Moses and Aaron gathering some people to help them who do it, because they're the ones who are going to get rid of the frogs.
You'd like to think that if the Torah wanted to indicate that it was Moshe and Aaron, it would have told us, but you never know. It's hard to kind of imagine Moshe and Aaron doing that task, right? Or feeling like they had to do that task. And it's a pretty yucky task.
I'm not talking about the word, but the experience I had with humans when they do, it's a kind of genocide of frogs. When they do this, they can't really clean it, because it's not like the story which we have that he was playing the flute and the children were following, or the mouse were following. The frogs are there, whatever they can see, they can see. But the plagues stay and continue, because the frogs are in wells. The frogs are in different places. Not all of them jump out and pile. So I think the effect is going to continue. They rotten, the bones will be there, the smell will be there, and it's not something that finishes with just one-time gathering. It doesn't.
Yeah, pretty yucky. And I wonder if we think about what the literary and theological impact of, like the double question we have to ask: why did this happen in the story, and why is it important that the Torah told us that it happened? Right? Those are two different questions, right? One is entirely within the logic of the narrative, and the other is the logic of why it appears in a sacred book. Like what does it say, or what does it do to our understanding of the story to know that the plague didn't end just when they died? Right? It's almost as if the plague had a 2.0 experience of it, right? There was the onerousness of and odiousness of the frogs invading the houses, but please kill the frogs. Okay, I'll kill the frogs. And then Egypt is not immediately relieved from the yuckiness of the frogs, right? Sue and then Larry, and then I'm going to do some Hebrew word exploration.
I was just thinking about what Rosemary said, that it didn't just go away. It's going to linger. And so now they've got this ruined Nile and the stinky fish in the Nile. And now there's all the stinky frogs, and the plagues are going to just keep on going. And then it's going to culminate in this giant crescendo where the Israelites leave and the Egyptian army chases them into the ruined, stinky Nile. And that's where they're destroyed, like the place where nobody wants to go near, and it's gross and full of death and dead, gross, and that's what they end up drowning in.
Well, depends on how we understand Yam Suf, right? They were several days away from Egypt, right? We don't think Yam Suf is usually translated as the Red Sea. It probably wasn't that.
It's not the Nile.
It's a watery death, so there's that association, but it's not the same body of water necessarily. I was thinking
it's the Nile. I know it's not the Nile, but now that you say that.
Larry, Rachel, Barry, Norm.
Similar comment.
And then Rick. Sorry, I didn't see your hand till now.
So when we have the previous plague, we're told the Hadad Asher the Yor Meta the Yiv Ash Yor.
Right, same verb.
It's the same. So but there it's the Yiv Ash, and here it's the Yiv Ash.
Because Yor is masculine and Aretz is feminine. So the subject follows the verb. That's just pure grammar. Aretz looks like a masculine verb, but if you think of the plural Aretz as Aretzot, and the word Eretz is a feminine word. Yeah.
And I'm only going to add, not only did it stink, perhaps.
Ainli Eretz Acheret, right?
Right, exactly right. Not only did it stink, but it's odious.
Yeah.
the land and everything became odious, which is an image of being not welcoming, something we don't want to have.
Yeah. It's almost as if the Torah is trying to tell us with this that, do you believe there are going to be 8 more of these? Right? Already the land is demolished, and it's even demolished upon the beginning of the relief from the plague, and it's still disgusting. And so this guy is gonna soften and then harden 8 more times after this. Right? Rachel, Barry, or Barry, Rachel, whoever gets the microphone first.
In the text, it's hamarim, heaps. Rashi is using.
Well, we'll get to Rashi. We haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. Here it is. I have my finger on it. Degorim. And Rashi uses another word you don't want to use right now. So there's 3 words used for heaps.
Right. There's the Hebrew chamarim. There's the translation into the Aramaic, who used the word degorin, and then Rashi brings it. Rashi, as we'll see in a second, basically uses the verb in the verse to help understand the noun of the word chamar. But we're going to look at a biblical dictionary first before we look at Rashi. But I see Rachel, and then I saw Rick and Barbara. But you put your hands down.
And Norm.
Is your hand still up? Okay. Yeah.
This is a very elementary question or comment. Do we have any sense of a time frame for the plagues? I'm reacting to what Susan had said, that at the time of the actual Exodus, after the 10th plague, is it still stinking from the second plague or the first plague? I always thought of it as the plagues were spread over months, and that there may, particularly for Pharaoh to harden his heart again, there must be some brief respite between the conclusion of one plague and the start of the next.
Yeah.
That's always how I imagined it.
Yeah. How much time? We have no idea. The Torah gives us really no indication of the flow of time here. Norm, Rick, Barbara.
I know that some commentators suggest there's a natural progression of these plagues. So when the Nile turns to blood, fish may be stuck there, but frogs can come out and escape. And that results in the next plague being the frogs. And when you have piles of stinking frogs, that attracts insects, including kinnim.
Nice. Barbara, and then Rick. Right, and so Nora, I think what you're implying there is that in order for that to work, you have to have the frogs not just disappear, but specifically linger to be the one that's inviting the next plague. Got it. Barbara, and then Rick.
Well, 2 things. Number one, because the frogs were all over the whole land, I don't think it's just the courtiers that went out and pulled them into heaps. I think it was all the people of the country that had to pile them up off their own properties. And then number 2, and Barry mentioned the Hamarim. This is the first time I think in all the time that I've been told about 2 verbs being used together that makes it a surely or a really. So this must mean to me, Hamarim, that this is really in heaps. Huge heaps, right? Big heaps. How often do you see that?
We have that in English also, right? Like, how do you, what's more than heaps? Heaps and heaps, right? Right. It's
right. Well, how often does that happen with nouns? Is actually my question.
I can't give you a numeric answer, but you're right that we've seen that in verb form, where like v'haya'im shamoa tishmu. We haven't gotten to the in the Torah yet, but that phrasing like that, and it's often. Verily you shall, if you verily listen, right? There's a way of intensifying a verb by doubling it. It's not the exact same form. The second form is different than the first form. I can't say offhand whether or not a doubling of the exact same word in a noun form appears back to back in the Torah before now. It may or may not. I don't remember.
Okay.
Shabbat Shabbaton. Yeah, maybe. Rick, and then Rona, and then I promise we'll get to next thing.
Hi. So, how they died? I just wanted to raise the question because it says vayamutu. It says they died, but it doesn't say like they were killed. Just they died by themselves. But going back to verse 5, lehachrit hatzfardim, a little bit of a trope thing. So there you have a pashta and the zakep katan lehachrit hatzfardim. Then when we get down to 9, it's vayamutu hatzfardim. So Moses, I'm asking the question. Moses is saying, well, they're going to be lehachrited, they're going to be destroyed, whatever that verb was there. And then in 7, they're just kind of going to be driven from the houses. They're just going to leave. And then in 9, they died. So I just wanted to ask if any commentator wrote about, well, who's killing the frogs? Are they being driven out, or what's going on there?
Yeah.
So
no good answer. Good question. No good answer. A lot of verbs are used to describe what's going to happen to end the frog plague. You have lahachrit to eliminate. You have saru, a kind of a removal, and now you have them dying, but it's a passive death, right? No one is killing them; they're just dying. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Verse 9 is written first active then passive. Vayas Adonai kedvar Moshe. God did according to Moshe, but it doesn't say vayamet et tzfardim, and he thus killed the tzfardim.
Right, God doesn't kill frogs. Yeah,
God did what Moshe said, and thusly, as a result of that, the frogs died. Okay, Rona, let's give Rona a microphone.
Is this one working? Yeah. I was going to say that I think it's very, very hard to reach a privileged, narcissistic dictator because they're really removed from the land. They're really removed from the everyday people. And that's why the only plague that got Pharaoh to soften his heart was the killing of the firstborn, because you can't escape death, right? But if you look at the next pasuk, it says that Pharaoh saw that there was relief, but the previous pasuk said that the land stank. So what relief are they talking about? And you have to assume that his magicians and servants and slaves that he's thronged by made it really fine for him. And so he wasn't suffering anymore. So he just assumed everyone was fine. Or he didn't even care. He just was like, oh, Egypt's fine. We've recovered. Right. No, right? But like, it's not how a normal human would behave, right? A normal human would have some empathy, but it shows something about his personality.
Yeah. And there's probably plenty of incense in the palace to
exactly
protect his kingly nostrils from the sting.
Well, also like I also don't know what that right some version of that. I also don't know what that word in the next pasuk means. Harvacha.
So we'll
that
get
says relief, but that also might mean something that relates to this.
We'll get there by November, I'm sure. Let me do a little bit of grammar work with you all. So I want to show you what the word chomarim. Before I bring it up, what Hebrew word? What the root chet mem resh? When you have approached that word in Hebrew in any form, what things might it mean?
Donkey.
Chomer is material.
Donkey.
Right? Donkey, chamor. Bitumen from the Noah's Ark, right? Right, astringency. Chamar in biblically was also wine, right? It's a very interesting 3-letter root that means lots of different things, none of which are the ones that it means here, right? So I want to show you that in the BDB. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see. Let me move this down.
More connected to the Dinah story in Shechem.
It's just a name. Yes. What the name meant and why he was named that, I don't know. Maybe he just acted like an ass. I don't know. Okay. So the root chamar This is the one that was not mentioned. Can mean to boil or foam up or ferment, right? I'm not aware. I'm not as aware of those usages. Okay. Chemer is wine. Okay. In Aramaic, chamra. Maybe that's interesting. Maybe that's the connection. Something which foams up. Yeah. Chemar, which Leonard said from the Noah story, right? The thing that some of the things. No, is it the Noah story? Yeah, where he's aligning the ark with that product. Okay. Correct. Ulvenim. Chomer here, cement, mortar, clay. Okay.
There's be'erot in the valley of the Sidim there. Two words repeating.
Correct. Well, hold on one second, and then so now we get to the middle of this page. We get the root that we're dealing with here, right? It's the vowel is different. In Aramaic would be chamer. It's the verb meaning to pile up or to heap, and we have it as a verb form and as a noun form. And here, chomer is the heap, and this is the BDB version of a jackpot. The verse that BDB uses to explain what this word means is chomarim, heaps of dead frogs, etc. Okay.
Fermenting and foaming the fits too.
Yeah, it's probably an accidental fit. It's more probably connected to wine than to heaps, but possibly. Rosemary?
No, it's just to say I saw the word Arabic in Persian. Khomre means the big pot that you make, not pot, the big, like pot that you make wine inside.
Oh, really?
And it is, and khamir will be the paste itself, like for making bread. But khomre is really that.
And if you look at the next one, it also can mean a measure of barley. So it's one of the most pluripotent three-letter Hebrew Aramaic words. There are, because most of these are not cousins of one another. They're actually just different words that were just formed over time with the same three letters, which is just an interesting thing from a linguistic perspective. Okay.
So Pharaoh was like, life is hard, life is difficult, let's just make frog wine out of it. That's something good.
Blech. Heaps and frog wine for everybody. Okay.
Enjoy it.
I saw Stevie's hand up before. Is your hand still up, Stevie?
Sure. Just to point out how different this is from like what Moses told Pharaoh was going to happen, right? Besaru Tzefarim, right? Like the frogs are going to leave, is what was promised. And we still have this phrase that God did as Moses said, but yet it's not the same. Like,
we heard most of that. Stevie was a little bit in and out.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. It's 9:00, and we're exactly where we were when we started this class, which is we had gotten through verse 10 and haven't read the Rashi. So let's read the Rashi, which is going to be just a 3-word Rashi, and we've actually already done some of the work of the Rashi. Carol, do you want to read the Rashi?
Are you pronouncing it chomarim or chomarim?
It's a chataf kamatz, so it's chomarim.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
Chomarim.
Because the original vowel is a cholom, it's chomer, right? And so when you pluralize it, it becomes a soft O rather than a hard O.
We'll remember that.
I'm not sure I'll.
No, but you know that, like, God, I can't think of another example, but all right, I'll think of another example when I'm not.
Kodashim.
Right, Kodesh has a dot O, and in the plural it's Kodashim, not Kodashim, but it's a Kamatz Katan or a Chataf Kamatz. Thank you, Rick. Okay.
I'm not sure I'm differentiating well, but chomarim, Tziburim, Katargumo.
Okay. So the first thing Rashi does is say, hey, reader, you're not aware of all 9 uses of the 3-letter root Chet Mem Resh. He basically turns it into the noun form of the verb in the sentence, right? Because they were yitzberuing, right? So he basically says, instead of saying they piled it up in heaps, they piled it up in piles, is basically what he's saying, right? He's creating he's using the noun at tzibor. Another interesting root, because tzibor, we think of the word tzibor as a public, right? But tsadi bet resh means to gather up, and therefore a tzibor is a gathering of the thing. So it says it just basically means what the verb said it meant, okay?
Katargumo digorin galin.
Okay, so, and it says, and as Barry was telling us before, or you can go, if you feel better about the Aramaic reader, go to the way Unkel's translated it. Unkel's translated as digorin, which is only helpful if you know what the word digorin means in Aramaic, and Rashi recognizes that we might not know that, so he tells us what digorin means. It means galim. A gal is a wave, but think of not just almost like a dune, right? Like it's like the shape of a wave, right? And this is not in the Rashi, but there's an annotated version of the Rashi that gives places where Rashi is getting some of this material from. And I want to bring up another verse for you guys. Okay. Okay, so look at what's on the screen. Hopefully you can see it. This is from Breshit chapter 31. This is in the narrative between Yaakov and Lavan, right? So look at verse 46. Vayomer Yaakov le'echav. Yaakov said to his brothers, Liktu avanim, go collect stones. Vayikchu avanim. They went and they collected stones. Vaya'asu gal, and they made a gal. They did not make a wave, right? They made a pile. They made a mound. Vayochu sham al hagal, and they ate there on the mound. Look at how Unkel's translates it there. On the right side, Vayomer Yaakov la'achuhi. Yaakov said to his brothers, Likutu avnin, take stones, unasivu avnim, and therefore they did bring stones, v'avadu degora, and they made a degora, which means that Unkel's there translates the Hebrew word gal, which doesn't mean wave, it means a mound, as a degora, v'achlu taman al degora, and ate on the mound. So you bring it all together. Rashi says, chomar means a tzibur, means a digor, means a gal, a pile of stuff. Okay? But he's aware that this is a not common use of a common root, and so he wanted us to give us that that storyline. Okay. Anything else on that, Rashi? I was going to show you the the gesture on Sibor, but just trust me, Sibor means a heap or a pile. We don't have to spend more time on that. Okay. Let's go to verse 11. Progress.
Before you go there,
yeah.
Can I ask a question?
So close.
Yes. In the Rashi, it says Digorah is the Targum of Hagal. What does it mean, the Targum, when what is
the word Targum means translation. When Rashi refers to the Targum, he's referring to Unkel's, the proselyte's Targum of the Torah into Aramaic in somewhere in the 1st century.
Thank you.
So the word can just mean lowercase t translation, but here it's referring to as the translation because it was just accepted as the translation into Aramaic of record. And again, it's the oldest one that remains fully extant. The only oldest translation of the Torah into any other language remains fully extant. Okay. Carol, verse 11.
Vayar paro ki haita harvacha v'hachbed et libo v'lo shama alehem ka'asher diver Adonai.
Okay.
And Pharaoh saw that there was whatever harvacha, it's translated as relief.
Okay.
And his heart was hardened. He did not listen. It's not a good translation, but didn't listen to them.
Maybe heed, pay attention, obey, right?
As God said.
Good. There seem to be 3 major questions in the verse, and if you have more, pile on. One is, what does harvacha mean, and why is it used here? 2, what is the exact form of hachbed et libo? We've talked before about how hard it is to translate just what the word kaved means, what the root means, but what's the form? Who's doing what to whom, right? And the third question that people often ask is, what is the kasher diber Adonai referring to, right? When it says, as God said, as God said when, about whom? Okay, let's start with harbacha. Has anyone have any associations with the three middle letters of that word, resh, vav, chet? Ruach, interesting. I think, I don't know if ruach is connected here, even though it's the same three letters, because in the word revach, the vav in the middle is always pronounced. It's more central to the root. Yeah? Sue, microphone?
I think of revach, I think profitability, actually, revach, or wideness or breadth.
Correct, right?
Kind of thing.
So revach in modern Hebrew, laharviach means to earn. Kam ata marviach, how much you earning from this gig. Marviach, how much financial space are you creating is really what the word means. On a keyboard, the space bar in Hebrew is revach, right? It's to create a space. It's ampleness, right? I don't know if ampleness is a word, but you understand what I mean. So haita harvacha, there was a relief, a space, some room. There was a break from what he had been experiencing. If we look at some of the different translations of that,
some margins.
Some margin, good. Let's look at some of the translations that we have on Sefaria. So look at how Everett Fox translates it. Very modern, if you ask me. But Pharaoh saw that there was breathing room. He usually doesn't do that. I wonder, I never thought about this before when I saw this. I wonder, Rona, if he's trying to play with ruach. Interesting, right? Like, Everett Fox, he writes it in a good modern English vernacular, but not using idioms that wouldn't have existed back then. So I wonder if he's linking harvacha to ruach. I don't know.
The breathing room is very interesting because of the smell.
Yeah, right.
Wow. That's like, well, then what, is he not smelling it? But back to the incense, possibly?
JPS
Or
says
that there was a
use the microphone.
time lag between the end of one and the start of the next.
JPS translates it as relief, as you see there. Koren translates it as respite. Translation is hard. Matsuda translates it as also respite. And what's our new favorite one? The Kahana. Let me bring it down. When Pharaoh saw that relief had come, so he used the word relief, he just changes some of the syntax of the sentence. What do you have over there, Larry? And then Barry has a thought. But Larry, get a microphone.
Aryeh Kaplan has respite, a respite.
Respite, okay.
And
what's the whole phrase? How does he render the phrase? When
Pharaoh saw that there had been a respite,
okay,
he hardened his heart. And Alter just has relief. He has, and Pharaoh saw that there was relief.
Okay. Barry, and then I see Renee, and then Diane.
Onkelos uses chavat vavachta. There's no resh in there, so this is a different word.
Same word. Revachta. You see the resh. The
resh is in the front.
Yeah, so same as harbacha. So he just basically translates the word harbacha into the exact Aramaic mirror of it, revachta. Yeah. Renee, and then Diane. Don't hear you, Renee.
Pharaoh saw that there had been a relief and kept hardening his heart.
What are you reading from?
Saperstein.
Okay, got it. Oh, so remember what Renee just said, kept hardening his heart. That kept is very interesting because the form of the hachbeit libo is really hard to just turn into the exact English grammatical phrase. So keep the kept in mind. Keep keeping it in mind. Keep keeping the kept. Diane.
So I want to go back to the first word, yeref paro. So it's not like this is what Paro was experiencing himself, that there was a respite, but rather he's looking to the people around him. So that suggests that he really, I don't know that he cares about the people around him, but at least he's paying attention to what's going on with him.
Well, it's interesting because you could read the Vayar Paro either the way you read it or the way Rona was reading it. So Vayar Paro, he looked out the window and he saw out there the people were getting a respite, so maybe it's not as bad. Or Pharaoh looked around his own situation, not so bad, right? So it's actually deliciously ambiguous what he was looking at and what he was experiencing. Okay. So that deals with, and by the way, Rashi ignores harvacha. He just thinks it's a normal word. Yeah, like he's not. Some of our curiosity about harvacha is because we think in English. I'm sure we're trying to think of the exact English word. If we thought in Old French, and that was our common language, it might have just been an easier thing to get there from harvacha. He doesn't find it worth commenting on, but he does comment on v'hachbeid et libo. Okay. Now, before we look at what hachbeid et libo is, it could have been, right? Vayichabeid et libo. He hardened his own heart, or v'libo kaved, and his heart was hard, describing a state of being. V'hachbeid, it's not a. Let's say it this way: there's grammatically no subject to hachbeid. There's an object at libo, but there's no one doing the chabed. It's not he feel. That would have been vayachbid or vayachbeid, or it's not piel vayichabed. So we don't really know what form it's in, and that's what Rashi is going to start with. Okay, you're still up, Carol.
No rest.
And as you're reading Rashi, remember Rashi's going to use grammatical terms that were the way Hebrew grammar was referred to back then. Excuse me, we use different grammatical terms for the same thing now.
Okay, that would explain my confusion.
Yes.
V'hachbeid et libo lishon pa'olhu.
Okay, so that's all unhelpful, right?
Correct.
Because unless you know what the word pa'ol meant in Hebrew grammar classes in France 1,000 years ago, okay? The best way of rendering it in English grammar terms is gerund. Right, the notion, almost like the noun-based notion of what the verb is, it's a cousin to the infinitive. Right, when you have, the infinitive, there's no subject of an infinitive, and there's no subject of a gerund. Right, so to win, it's just the notion of winning, and you could also say winning. Right, both are ways of referring to the action, but without applying a subject to it. So pa'ol is an ancient Hebrew way of referring to the notion of the verb, but not applying the verb in any particular way. Okay, and then all Rashi does for the rest of the comment is give us 4 other places in Tanakh where a similar construction of a verb is used, and he says, basically saying, look at those, you'll see that it's obvious what it means there. Apply that here. But Rashi doesn't say that. All he does is point us in that direction, and we're going to look at them. I see Barry's hand up. Thanks.
So like the hardening of his heart by him.
Right. Like the hardening, or it's going to be really hard to do in good English. Right. He saw that.
That's the best you can make.
Yeah.
The hardening of his heart by him.
Right. Or his heart, or the heart remained hardened. It's very hard to do. But we'll look at the other 4 verses he gives, and then maybe we'll see if we can come up with a communal translation backwards into ours. Yes, Norm.
Zilberman translates it as he allowed his heart to be hardened, which is different from what we usually see. We see often he hardened his own heart.
Yes.
We hear God hardened his heart. Here we have something sort of different. He allowed his heart to be hardened.
Yeah, because those translations are correct that this phrase does not mean he hardened his heart, and it doesn't mean that God hardened his heart. It's something else. Everett Fox translated it as, so he made his heart heavy with stubbornness. I'm not sure that, with great respect for Fox, who knows much more about this than I ever will, that still seems somehow lacking, right? Let's look at some of the verses that Rashi is going to make reference to. So let me just bring that up.
By the way, before you were talking about the form of the verb, asbed, in Saperstein it says it's a poal form.
No, Rashi. Right. Rashi says Lashon Pa'ol. which is Rashi's way of referring to the concept of the verb without it being assigned a particular subject. Rosemary?
I just think of Marie Antoinette when they said there is no bread to eat. He said, give them the cake. And that's returning to their nature. And they are grown up like that. Probably here, nobody hardened his heart, but he went to his nature, his basic education.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see if we can figure out from the verses that Rashi throws us to what he thinks it means in our verse. The first one he throws us to is Parshat Lech Lecha. Avram, if you go up a bit, this is towards the beginning of Avram's sojourn in land of Canaan, and the verse says, "Vayisa Avram haloch v'nasoa hanegba." Avram journeyed, going and coming. Right, there's that gerund, the ing. Right, it's haloch v'nasoa is not a new verb. It's describing the journey. He went. It's does this mean there and back? It's translated here by Erev Frox as a continuous action. He just kind of wended his way southward. Okay? That's the first one that Rashi brings us to. The second one is from the second book of Malachim, chapter 3, verse 24. Context is interesting, but we're here looking at the grammar. Vayavo el machane Yisrael, they entered the Israelite camp. Vayakumu Yisrael, Israelites got up. Vayaku et Moab, they smote the Moabites. Vayanusu mipnehem, who fled. Vayakuba, and then it continues that verb. They continued to smite them. Vehakot et Moab. So the question is, what does the vahakot mean? According to Rashi, the vahakot here is the same as, and it even sounds the same, haloch v'nasoa, ao, which, by the way, ao, those are the vowels of pa'ol, which is what Rashi says is happening in our verse, even though our verse is not the kavod, but hachbeid, but something like an ongoing smiting, right? It's not the verb. They smote them in a hakot way, just continuous smiting. Okay? The smiting continued. Okay, so far we got 2 for 2, and it's not just a gerund, according to Rashi, but some kind of ongoing action, right? That continues. It's not just it happened once. Look at the next one he brings us to, which is the second book of Shmuel, first book of Shmuel, chapter 2, verse 13 on the page. This is, but just the context is interesting. It's Saul not being able to figure out why David is being more favored than he is, right? David, his son's best friend. Vayomer elav Shaul. Right, so this is king, the current king, regarding the one who would be king. Shaul said to him, "Lama kashartem alai ata." Why have you? It's interesting to use the word kashar. It means, we can think of it as to connect, but here it means to kind of conspire, to plot against. Uvein yishai betitcha lo lechem, giving him food and sustenance. V'cherev, gave him a sword. V'shaol ao, right, and asking of him or about him to God. This was a reference to their using the Urim v'Tumim, the oracles, to find out from God how David is doing. Basically, Saul said, "Why are you so concerned about David? Right? Be more concerned about me." But the form is v'sha'olo. Why are you doing this? And continuing to ask using these oracles how David is doing. Right? Translated here as, translated here rather plainly, and inquired of God. But it's that same form. And then the last one that Rashi brings us to, which is the book of Kings, chapter 20, verse 37. Vayimsa ish acher. He met another man. Vayomer hakeni 9. He said, "Strike me." Vayakehu haish. He struck him. Hakeh uvatsoa. So it's translated here as he struck him and wounded him, but the patsoa, right, is the same form as haloch v'nasoa and Shaol. He struck him, continued to strike him, or the wounds continued to wound him. It's some kind of ongoing action, right? So from those 4, as the specific ones that Rashi is bringing, it's basically, if you put that back into our verse, it could be something like, Pharaoh saw that there was a relief, and that ongoing hardening of his heart, right? His heart is still ongoing in its hardening. Joel, microphone.
In the last example again.
Oh, the last example. Okay.
It says hakeh. So I'm wondering whether the first verb is also in the pa'ol, just like we have in ours.
And the hachbed. Yeah, maybe. Yes. Right. So that apparently whatever Rashi is calling the pa'ol, depending on the verb form, it could either actually be o vowels or a. Hakeh, hachbed. Good. What do you make of this? Aside from it being a very nerdy grammar rabbit hole. Anything? All right. Sorry, Rashi, we were just not that interested. Barry and then Larry.
Like a lot of messing.
When God tells Moshe at the very beginning that all these things are going to happen, but Pharaoh will continue. I forget what the phrasing was, but was there something in there that there would be continuation? Pharaoh's whatever it is would continue.
Yeah. Right. Some people read Rashi as trying to make the point that don't think his heart had ever stopped being hard. That the hachbed labo is not that in that moment Pharaoh said, I was going to let them go, but you know what? I'm going to harden my heart. But more a reminder that since he has a tendency to have a hardened heart, as soon as he had a tiny bit of relief, the hardening of the heart became more prominent in his actions, something like that. And that's why it's written that way, an ongoing state of being. Larry?
Two things. One, just a comment on Harvacha. There's a Misrat Harvacha in Israel. It's Ministry of Social Affairs or whatever.
Harvacha is social affairs, not earnings, it's not
no.
Interesting.
And also, I'm pretty sure before there was Keren Hishtamut, which was a fund that you accumulate when you're working for your further training. I think there was a Keren Harvacha, but there also were in the early days of Israel, employers provided camps that I think were called Machane Harvacha. Anybody else know this? Havracha? It's different? So maybe I'm confusing it. Okay, now on a completely different subject, looking at this from the meta point of view again.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna be the defense attorney for Pharaoh. So basically, earlier on, the whole idea was to take the frogs out.
Saru.
Yeah, not just to leave them there stinking. And that was the deal that Pharaoh made with Moses. If you get the frogs out of here, then I'll let you go.
You tell me when you want me to totally remove the, yeah.
And what ended up happening, what ended up happening is they ended up dying. We don't know, I think we talked about before what it meant, minha beitim or whatever, from the houses, but they ended up dying there and stinking up the joint. All right. So once they got cleared, Pharaoh said, he got a little bit of relief from the problem, but he hadn't had his the other side of the deal made. He said he became stubborn. Maybe he simply went back on his deal, and he said, "Okay, I'm not going to live up to my part of the deal either. You can't go."
Yeah, interesting. You could almost read that saying, and when he saw that all there was a little relief, as opposed to they were gone. He saw it like, it's a little bit better. Then okay, then I'll offer you back just a little bit, but not everything I promise. Interesting, Rick, and then we'll look at the next verse if we have time.
Well, the ending is the same 6 words. Verse 22 at the end of the first one. 22. Vayechizak lev paro, right? So he hardened his heart. V'lo shama lehem kasher diber Adonai. It's the same. V'lo shama lehem kasher diber Adonai. So there's a
comment on that there on the kasher diber Adonai.
I don't know. I'm just saying it's kind of like a formulaic. It's a structure of the story that happens. When this happens, then that happens.
Yeah. That in that verse, chapter 7, verse 22, where the last 6 words are the same. Rashi does not comment on the kasher diber Adonai. as God said, but Rashi does comment on the Kasher Dibra Adonai here. Maybe we'll kind of end with this. Carol, if you read that last phrase, Kasher Dibra Adonai.
Kasher Dibra Adonai v'heichan diber v'lo yishma alechem paro. I don't know what does the la'ayil mean?
Above. La'el means above.
Okay. Above in Zayin Daled.
So what does v'heichan diber mean?
When exactly did he speak?
Right. So Rashi, you might be saying, reader, because it's been a long time, which maybe explains why Rashi does not say this in chapter 7, because it was a more of an immediate antecedent. When we haven't heard God mention this recently, back in chapter 7, verse 4, which everyone can just turn back to, God promises, V'lo yishma alechem paro. God says to Moses, by the way, Pharaoh is not going to listen to you. And therefore, v'natati et yadi b'Mitzrayim, I'm going to place my hand hard on Egypt, and I'm going to bring out all these shvatim dolim, right? So reader, in case you have forgotten that God predicted all of this, right? That's why it's repeated here, kasher diberna, just as God had anticipated it was going to happen. Okay, good. All right. Anything else on verse 11? Dare we read verse 12? Let's read verse 12. Elon, you want to read verse 12?
Vayomer Adonai el Moshe emor el Aaron Vayomer Adonai el Moshe emor el Aaron neta et mamcha v'chach et afar haaretz v'haya lechinis b'chol eretz Mitzrayim.
Okay, so let's break it down a bit. Vayomer Adonai Moshe, God said to Moses, Emor el hakonim, Emor is imperative. El ha'aron, say to Aaron, and then another imperative. So this is also like our verses that have quotation marks, and then a quotation mark and a quotation mark. This is what you should say to Aaron. Netei et matcha, extend your mateh, your powerful rod. V'hach et ha'afar, hach v'hika. It's hard to see that word without the hey at the end, but to smite, to smack. Smack the afar ha'aretz. What's afar? Dust. So before you hit the water, now lay down your rod onto the land. V'haya lechinim b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. Now, even if we know what the word chinim means, lice, the phrasing v'haya le is very hard to make sense of. If it would have been v'hayu chinim, it would mean there will be lice. The v'haya, it's hard to know what the subject of v'haya is, because it's not the kinim, because kinim is plural.
So far.
So then so if it's afar, then what? So
the dust will become lice.
Right. So what I was going to say next is that sometimes the verb haya with the lamed preposition goes from meaning the verb to be to meaning the verb to become. Right. That it will become. Maybe it's the afar itself. It will turn into kinim, b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, throughout the entire land of Egypt. Notice that kinim here is written without a yud after the nun. You could have also written it with a nun with a yud. And some people, Rashi does not, but some commentaries are interested in that absence of a yud. So we're at the beginning of the third plague. Any questions or comments on that verse? And we'll obviously look at the Rashi next time. By the way, next week we'll be in the Sukkah, as we normally do when we.
Yeah, just a quick question. In this translation we have here, it says gnats as opposed to lice. As far as I know, gnats and lice are different things. Is there a reason that they would translate it as gnats?
You know, it's a guess, right? It has come to be known in vernacular English that the third plague is lice. That doesn't mean that it's, correct from a zoological perspective. I don't know what the difference is between a gnat and a louse, and I don't know how it came to be that this was understood to be lice in English. But it's the most common way of translating it. But I don't know why it became that way.
Gnats are
worse than gnats.
Lice bite and
Gnats are flying insects, and the lice are from the ground up. So if you imagine this as things coming down from the sky or things from the ground up.
Good to be back with you all.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.